How many tens of thousands of books have already been written on this topic? How many seminars, debates, college classes? There's just no way that I can summarize a centuries-long discussion in a single YouTube video. But what I hope to offer are some compelling arguments that might give you a good place to start as you try to formulate your own answer to this very difficult question. I want to address a few different aspects to this. But first, let me just say that whenever you're discussing this, you've got to be sensitive. You've got to be compassionate, because most of the time when people are seriously thinking about this, it's because they're in pain or they know someone who is. And trying to explain this to someone who is already in a tense emotional state might not be the best idea. Every situation needs to be assessed individually and very carefully, but before you launch into any kind of theological explanation about God and evil and suffering and whatnot, test the waters and just see where they're at. Okay, let me start us off on this note. In Romans 8:18, Paul says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us." Notice the words suffering and present time. Christianity does not give us a free pass from suffering. Knowing Jesus is not a get out of suffering card. In fact, Jesus said in this life, you will have trouble. John 16:33. Suffering is a part of life. To expect otherwise is frankly unrealistic. Why? Why shouldn't we expect evil and suffering and hardship? Well, here's point number one. The existence of evil proves the existence of God. A lot of people think the opposite of this. They say that the existence of evil is proof of God's non-existence. Like, if God were real, there wouldn't be bad things that happen. But when you really think about it, this perspective actually doesn't make sense. How can we acknowledge the existence of evil, or even know what evil is, if there isn't a good to counterbalance it, you know? You don't have shadows without sunlight. You can't know justice without injustice. In fact, that comes from a quote by C.S. Lewis, a famous atheist who became a Christian. He said, "As an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust?" Dr. Frank Turek of crossexamined.org, I think he hit the nail on the head when he said, "There would be no such thing as evil unless there was a standard of good. And there must be a standard of good out there, outside of ourselves, that establishes what goodness is, so we would even know what evil is." You know what evil is? I'll tell you what evil is. Actually, I'm gonna tell you what pastor and apologist Mike Winger said. Only pointless, constant suffering in the absence of good would show that the Christian God doesn't exist. Pointless, constant suffering. But that's not what we see around the world, is it? What we see is temporary and purposeful suffering. Do you understand what's being said here? There can be no evil if there is no moral good. Otherwise, it's just what is, and we wouldn't question it because we wouldn't know the difference. One of the things that may prevent us from understanding this is our emotions. There's an emotional aspect to this question that can too often get in the way, because our culture is currently fueled by emotional overreactions to just about everything. In fact, I would argue that too many emotions and not enough logic are partly what have refueled heated conversations about racism and feminism for the past 20 years or so. High emotions have made it almost impossible to have reasonable discussions about trans people and social activism. Just say the name Donald Trump, and some people will react in such a negative, emotional way, it renders them almost incapable of having a reasonable discussion. Now, when it comes to this issue of why God, a supposedly good, loving, all-powerful being, allows so much evil in this world, some people have a hard time detaching their emotions from the question to think about it. And there's good reason for that. There are many people out there who have suffered real tragedy. There are people who have lost children to cancer and abduction, who have experienced great pain through sickness and injury. Here in Texas, we recently experienced a devastating flood that took the lives of about 140 people, including dozens of children. When I started preparing this video, my wife and I had just gone through a miscarriage. Loss and pain and suffering is a part of this life, and it's okay to feel it. So I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to invalidate their emotions, but it is absolutely essential that we learn to master what we're feeling sometimes so we can logically think our way through a difficult question, or Or we put the difficult question on the back burner so we have time to feel and hurt and grieve. When we found out our baby had died in the womb, I didn't immediately start questioning God. I didn't want to. I didn't want to go there because I knew that I wasn't in the emotional headspace to think about it rationally. So if we can set aside our emotions for a second, it's not hard to see that the only reason we even recognize evil exists is because a good God exists. That leads us to inevitably ask, if he is so good, why does he allow all this bad stuff? If we assume that God is who he says he is, and if you've been following me through this series, there's no reason to doubt that he's not, then he is all powerful, right? If he created the universe, he can create things as immense as our galaxy and as amazingly intricate as the human eye. And so him having the power to control absolutely everything, including human beings, isn't a stretch. But here's the rub. When God created human beings, he was kind enough and loving enough to give them freedom, complete freedom. If human beings are to be truly free, we cannot be forced to obey God. He is not a dictator, nor has he created us to be puppets on a string. He gave us the ability to choose. The first humans endowed with their incredible gift of free will made some extremely poor choices. And every human being since then has continued to make very poor choices. This completely places the cause of evil onto the shoulders of us. You can't blame God for that. God created freedom, we abused that freedom, and the ripple effects of our poor choices have been monumental. The first murder in the history of the Bible gave way to families that despised each other, that gave way to nations that fought each other, that gave way to an entire planet in distress. But still we ask, why doesn't God just get rid of cancer? Why did God allow that child to die? Why did he allow that soldier to get paralyzed in that war? Why did he allow that car crash or that bomb to go off or that school shooting? Why didn't he stop it? Those are all very specific questions to very specific circumstances that no one has an answer for. And if you're a Christian and you're talking to someone who has been through something specific like this, don't try to offer them an explanation because frankly, you can't. You can't explain it. And even if you could, it's not likely they would want to hear it, at least at that moment, because, and some people might not like this answer, or it may sound insensitive, but it doesn't mean it's not true. It's human pride that thinks God owes us an explanation for the bad things that we started. Why, God, did you allow my friend to die in that fire? I want to know. They suffered and they died and it was so pointless. Was it pointless though? Or do you just feel that way? You don't know the circumstances, the spiritual implications of what might have been going on, the lives that may be impacted for the better because of some tragedy. We don't know all that's going on. Many, many, many great things are born from tragedy. All that being said, I think there are a few general ways to answer questions about why God allows suffering. The first reason I think God allows suffering is because we don't learn from success as much as we do our failures. Michael Jordan, arguably one of the greatest basketball players of all time, said, "I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." Bethany Hamilton lost her arm to a 14-foot tiger shark when she was just a teenager out surfing. Yet she went on to become a national surfing champion, a motivational speaker, an author, and she has since traveled the world sharing her incredible testimony of faith. Ministries that powerful are often born from tragedy and suffering. Horatio Spafford was a lawyer and a businessman of the late 19th century. While his wife and 4 daughters were on a ship bound to Europe, it collided with another ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, killing 226 passengers, including all 4 of his daughters. Bear in mind that this guy, just a couple years before, he had lost his real estate holdings and his son in the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. After learning that his daughters had also died, he boarded a ship to Europe to meet up with his wife. On the way, as his ship sailed over the waters where his daughters died, he penned the words to one of the greatest hymns ever written. "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." Songs with that much meaning and power that resonate for over 100 years aren't born from success. They come from suffering. In that passage from Romans 8 that I quoted earlier, Paul compares suffering to the pains in childbirth to say that pain is temporary, but necessary for the something better that is to come. Why does God allow suffering? I think he knows it's the only way we learn anything. He knows it's the best way for us to become the best version of ourselves. He wants us to come to him for rescue. He wants us to recognize that nothing can save us from the path of destruction we're on except for him. And so he allows suffering because every time we're at the end of our rope, we turn to him. It's why most American prisons have copies of the Bible freely available, and why many hospitals have rooms designed exclusively for prayer. When we're knocked down, we start asking questions that we wouldn't ask in any other circumstances. Those questions lead us to evidence of God's love, where we have another choice. Are we going to accept him or not? Another reason I think God allows suffering is for correction. Any parent will tell you that sometimes you just have to let your kid make a mistake so they can learn. Sometimes you have to let them fall down, but sometimes you have to stop them. You have to say no. A loving parent understands the value of saying no. Proverbs 3:12 says that for whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights. God doesn't want us to suffer. He's not vindictive, but he also knows it's the best way to guide us and help us improve ourselves. I think suffering can help purify us of unwanted addictions and bad habits. Suffering helps us empathize with other people who we otherwise might not relate to or even be friends with. Suffering can bring us together and unify the goals of an entire nation, such as what happened to America after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. School shootings, terrorist attacks, these are horrible things, of course, but they bring communities and people together in ways that wouldn't happen without suffering. These incidents lead us to create new safety measures and procedures and protections and values that help us keep stuff like that from ever happening again. Does it always work? No, because we live in an imperfect world, but that's the result of the poor choices that we've made. Would it be better if we could all come together in different ways, more positive ways, ways that don't involve suffering? Yeah, it would be great. But human beings don't work like that. God understands this, and it's partly why he will use pain and suffering to bring about correction. And sometimes, suffering is for punishment. If you drink so much alcohol that you develop liver problems, or if you abuse your sex life to the point that you contract an STD, if your anger leads you to hurting others, if your political viewpoints lead you to elect the wrong senators who pass certain bills that contribute to the destruction of the family system or the freedom to worship or higher taxes, well, all those things are the consequences of bad choices. And the Bible is full of stories of God sending plagues and judgments and horrible circumstances onto various people for the purpose of punishing bad choices. Why? Because he is just. What kind of God would God be if he didn't hold accountable those who make choices that go against his moral law? Okay, Jake, I see what you're saying, but why doesn't God protect good people? I see why suffering and evil can happen to bad people, but why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? I love the way Dr. Frank Turek put this. He said, I know this is going to sound harsh, but according to the Christian viewpoint, there are no good people. There may be some people who are better than others from an external perspective, but all of us are fallen, and God doesn't owe us anything. None of us are exempt from suffering, but this doesn't mean that God doesn't care, that he isn't loving, that he isn't kind, or that he doesn't exist. Frank Turek said, look, people have to make their own decisions. God does not overwhelm us with evidence, so we are compelled to believe, but he gives us enough evidence to know if we want to believe that he's real, but he leaves enough ambiguity so we can go our own way if we want to. Why doesn't God just put an end to suffering? Skeptics like to use this argument a lot. They say, well, if God were real, if he was so good and so loving, he would bring an end to this world and just take us up to heaven and get it over with. A statement like that comes from a very narrow-minded perspective of our current circumstances, and it fails to take into account that this sliver of existence that we call life might not be all there is. Why hasn't God put an end to all this suffering? God hasn't brought an end to suffering yet. He wants to, and he will, but he's going to give us many chances to turn to him first. And that's what he's been doing all throughout history. The entire story of the Bible is God trying to get humanity to turn to him for rescue before we drive ourselves into the ground. But we have rejected him every single time. Human beings rejected the restart that was the global flood. We rejected the 10 Commandments and the laws of the Old Testament. We rejected the kings and the prophets that God appointed. We rejected his son, Jesus Christ. And day after day, we reject God no matter how many times he reaches out to get our attention. But the Bible says he will bring an end to suffering. You can read about how it's all going to happen in the book of Revelation. Of all the prophecies in the Bible, some of them made thousands of years ago, some of them made about 60 years after Jesus was murdered. But of all the prophecies in the Bible, the only ones that have yet to come true are those regarding the end times. But we are getting closer and closer to that day. Amen. If you're a Christian, this is one of those essential questions that you need to have an answer for, not just for the benefit of your own faith, but to help anyone who may be seeking answers. If this rambling video helps you in any way craft an answer, yay, mission accomplished. Please give this video a like, maybe consider subscribing, play nice in the comments, and thanks for watching. Until next time.